The slap echoed like a gunshot through the crystal-gilded ballroom. Champagne flutes froze midair. Conversations died. Even the string quartet seemed to miss a beat. Diana Lucchese stood over the trembling waitress like a crimson-clad executioner, her diamond-laden hands still raised, her lips curled in disgust. "Do you have any idea who you just touched?" Diana's voice sliced through the stunned silence, each word dripping with venom. "Watch where you're going, girl." Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The Venetian Grand Hotel's annual charity gala was New York's most exclusive event where Manhattan's elite gathered under Swarovski chandeliers to write checks and trade secrets. White-gloved servers moved like ghosts between tables draped in silk. Imported roses perfumed the air, and the soft murmur of old money created the perfect backdrop for privilege gone unchecked. Teresa Smith, 24 years old, had never imagined that accepting an extra shift to cover her mother's medical bills would place her at the epicenter of a scandal that would topple an empire. A finance graduate working undercover for a federal task force, she needed the cover as much as she needed the paycheck. Her natural hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and she carried her serving tray with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned early to balance impossible burdens. Diana Lucchese, on the other hand, was exactly the type of woman who treated charity galas like personal fashion shows. Wife of Romano Lucchese, one of New York's most feared mafia bosses, she enjoyed all the luxuries that came with marrying into power. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, the designer wardrobe that cost more than most people's mortgages, the protection of a name that made even seasoned criminals look away. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Teresa said, her voice steady despite the burning handprint on her cheek. She bent to collect the fragments of the shattered champagne glass that had started it all. "I'll have this cleaned immediately." "Don't bother," Diana announced, her voice pitched to carry across nearby tables. "I suppose accidents are inevitable when they hire people like you for events of this caliber." The poison in those words was so potent that elegant heads turned. Whispered conversations paused. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others leaned in, hungry for the spectacle of public degradation. "Perhaps the hotel should reconsider their staffing choices," Diana continued, gesturing theatrically. "Hire servers who understand how to conduct themselves in civilized society." What Diana didn't know was that every toxic syllable was being absorbed by Teresa, with the patience of someone who had survived far worse. Raised in the Bronx by a single mother who worked doubles to keep food on the table, Teresa had learned that real power doesn't shout or strike back. It watches. It records. It waits for the perfect moment. "Of course, ma'am," Teresa replied, maintaining a serenity that made Diana's eyes narrow with frustration at the lack of tears. "I'll ensure everything is handled properly." As she turned toward the kitchen with the broken glass, Teresa passed the main staircase where a broad-shouldered man in an impeccably tailored suit watched the entire scene with an expression carved from stone. His dark eyes tracked her movement with unnerving focus, and when their gazes met for a heartbeat, she saw something flicker there, recognition perhaps, or calculation. Romano Lucchese had built his empire on a single principle: observe people when they think no one important is watching. And in that crystalline moment, watching his wife publicly destroy a young working woman's dignity, he saw two things with perfect clarity: his wife's true nature, exposed like rot beneath expensive perfume, and the remarkable composure of a waitress who refused to break under fire. Something in the way she held herself told him she was no ordinary server. And Romano Lucchese trusted his instincts above all else. The kitchen door swung shut behind Teresa, muffling the orchestral elegance of the ballroom and replacing it with the sharp clatter of pots, the hiss of steam, and voices raised in controlled chaos. She set the tray of broken glass on the steel counter, with hands that betrayed her trembling despite every command she gave them to stop. "Dios mío, Teresa!" Maria appeared at her side instantly, her weathered face creased with concern. The older woman had been working events at the Venetian Grand for 15 years, long enough to recognize when someone was barely holding it together. "I saw what happened out there. That para you need to leave. Go home. I'll cover your tables." "I'm fine." Teresa's voice came out steadier than she expected, though her cheek still burned with the phantom heat of Diana's hand. "You're not fine. Your face is—" Maria reached out to touch the reddened skin, but Teresa stepped back gently. "I said I'm fine, Maria." She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need this shift. My mother's prescription costs went up again, and—" "Your pride isn't worth this, mija." But it wasn't about pride. It was about survival, and something far more complicated than Maria could ever know. Teresa moved to the industrial sink and splashed cold water on her face, watching the drops fall from her fingers like diamonds under the harsh fluorescent lights. In the reflection of the steel backsplash, she saw herself as Diana must have seen her. Just another invisible black girl in a white collar and vest, someone to be dismissed, degraded, forgotten. What Diana couldn't see was the full-ride scholarship to NYU, the finance degree earned while working 3 jobs, the federal badge she kept locked in a drawer at her studio apartment in Washington Heights. What no one in that glittering ballroom knew was that Teresa Smith wasn't just a waitress picking up extra shifts. She was Special Analyst Teresa Smith, embedded by a federal task force that had spent 2 years building a case against Lucchese Enterprises. Money laundering, offshore accounts, charities used as fronts to clean millions in blood money. And tonight, she'd been standing less than 3 feet from Romano Lucchese's inner circle when Diana decided to make her a spectacle. "I've seen worse than a rich woman with too much wine and not enough sense," Teresa said finally, drying her face with a kitchen towel. It wasn't a lie. Growing up in the South Bronx, she'd learned early that cruelty came in far more dangerous forms than public humiliation. Maria shook her head but knew better than to argue. "Table 12 needs their entrees. You want me to? I'll take them." Teresa straightened her vest, checked her reflection one more time, and pushed back through the door into the world of crystal and contempt. She could do this. She'd been doing it for months. On the opposite side of the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Romano Lucchese stood with his wife in what appeared to be casual conversation. To anyone watching, they looked like any other wealthy couple, her hand resting lightly on his arm, his posture relaxed. But Diana knew her husband well enough to recognize the ice beneath his calm. "You're angry," she said, her smile never wavering for the benefit of passing guests. "You embarrassed yourself more than her." Romano's voice was quiet, controlled the tone he used when he was furious but couldn't show it. Diana's laugh was light, dismissive. "Oh, please. That girl was clumsy and disrespectful. Someone needed to put her in her place." "Her place?" Romano turned to look at his wife fully, and something in his dark eyes made her smile falter. "You made a scene at a charity event filled with photographers and social media. You made us look. I made her look like what she is hired. Help who doesn't know how to move properly in our world." Diana's voice took on an edge. "Since when do you care about waitstaff, Romano? You've never noticed the help before." He hadn't. That was true. But he'd also never seen anyone absorb that kind of public humiliation with such unnerving composure. Most people would have cried, apologized profusely, scurried away in shame. That girl had done none of those things. She'd looked at him. Just for a second, when their eyes met, he'd seen something that didn't belong in a server's gaze calculation, assessment, the kind of cold evaluation he recognized because he used it himself. "Go enjoy your champagne, Diana." Romano gestured vaguely toward her waiting circle of friends. "I have business to attend to." As she walked away, her red dress flowing like spilled wine across the marble floor, Romano caught the eye of the man standing discreetly near the service entrance. Vince Moretti had been Romano's right hand for 12 years, a former Marine with a gift for finding answers to questions most people didn't know to ask. Vince approached with the careful economy of movement that came from a life lived in Romano's shadow. "The waitress," Romano said without preamble. "The one my wife just humiliated. Find out who she really is." "You think she's someone?" "I think Diana doesn't slap people who are nobody." Romano's jaw tightened. "And I think that girl took it like someone who's been trained not to react. Get me everything: background, employment history, places she's lived, people she knows. I want to know why she's here." "You got it, boss." Vince melted back into the crowd, already pulling out his phone. Romano returned to his conversation with a city councilman, but his attention remained divided. Somewhere out there, moving between tables with practiced grace, that waitress was carrying on as if nothing had happened. That kind of control was either exceptional stupidity or exceptional training. And Romano hadn't built his empire by ignoring his instincts. 3 hours later, Teresa locked the door of her studio apartment and finally allowed herself to collapse onto the second-hand sofa. Her feet ached. Her face still throbbed with a dull, angry heat. But none of that mattered. She pulled out her phone and opened an encrypted messaging app, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Incident tonight. Maintained cover. Possible compromise. Lucchese observed the altercation closely. Advise." The response came within seconds. "Hold position. Report anything unusual. Do not break cover unless compromised." Teresa set the phone aside and reached for her vest, still draped over the arm of the couch. Her fingers found the tiny lapel pin innocuous, ordinary, the kind of decorative button dozens of servers wore. Except this one had been recording for the past 6 hours. She connected it to her laptop and pulled up the audio file, scrolling through until she found the timestamp. Diana's voice came through clearly, every venomous word preserved in digital memory. But more importantly, there were other voices in that recording, conversations happening at nearby tables while she served drinks, while she collected plates, while everyone assumed she was too insignificant to notice. Romano's associates discussing a property acquisition in Queens, references to the shipment from Palermo, mentions of accounts that didn't appear in any legitimate business filings. The slap had been humiliating, yes, but it had also given her an excuse to linger near their table, to pass by multiple times, to capture conversations that would normally happen only behind closed doors. Teresa saved the file and created a backup, her mind already composing the report she'd submit to her handler tomorrow. Diana Lucchese had tried to break her tonight. Instead, she'd handed Teresa exactly what the task force needed: evidence, recorded in the cruel voice of a woman who thought she was untouchable. Teresa leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the silence of her tiny apartment wrap around her like armor. She'd been through worse than this, and she'd survive whatever came next. She always did. Romano Lucchese didn't sleep well, hadn't for years. It was a side effect of the life he'd chosen, where trust was a luxury and paranoia was survival. So when Vince knocked on his office door at 7 in the morning, 2 days after the gala, Romano was already at his desk, espresso in hand, reviewing acquisition reports for a waterfront property in Red Hook. Got what you asked for? Vince dropped a manila folder on the desk. Teresa Marie Smith, 24, born in the Bronx, raised by a single mother, Patricia Smith, works as a nurse at Mount Sinai, father unknown, not listed on the birth certificate. Romano opened the folder, scanning the contents with the focus of a man accustomed to finding meaning in details others missed. Full scholarship to NYU, Vince continued. Graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance. Volunteered at a South Bronx community center throughout college, teaching financial literacy to low-income families. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Current employment: part-time analyst at a small consulting firm in Midtown, supplemented with catering gigs through elite event staffing. Too clean, Romano said quietly, his eyes narrowing at a particular line on her academic transcript. Perfect grades, every single semester. That's what I thought. Vince leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Nobody's that clean, especially not coming from where she came from. I had our guy run her social media, minimal presence. LinkedIn is professional but generic. Instagram is private with maybe 50 followers. No Facebook, no TikTok. For someone her age, that's unusual. Romano closed the folder and sat back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He thought about that moment in the ballroom, the way she'd stood there after Diana struck her, absorbing the blow with an eerie stillness. Most people crumbled under that kind of public humiliation. They cried. They apologized excessively. They shrank into themselves. Not Teresa Smith. Her eyes had met his for less than a second, but that second told him everything. There had been pain. Yes, you couldn't fake the physical shock of being slapped, but underneath it he'd seen something else. Control. The kind of iron self-discipline that came from training, from purpose, from knowing that showing weakness wasn't an option. What do you want me to do? Vince asked. Keep watching her, discreetly. Romano opened a desk drawer and pulled out a burner phone, scrolling through his contacts. And get me a meeting with Carmine at the consulting firm she supposedly works for. I want to know if she's really an analyst or if that's just a paper trail. You think she's a cop? I think she's something. Romano's voice was quiet, thoughtful. And I want to know what before it becomes a problem. Across town, in a nondescript federal building near Federal Plaza, Teresa sat across from her handler in a windowless conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and institutional disinfection. Agent Marcus Reed was 47, ex-military, and possessed the kind of perpetual skepticism that came from 20 years watching cases fall apart over minor mistakes. He listened to the audio file through headphones, his expression giving away nothing. When it finished, he removed the headphones and set them on the table with deliberate care. This is good work, Smith. The property discussion, the Palermo reference that connects 3 dots we've been trying to link for months. He paused, his gray eyes sharp. But we have a problem. The slap. Reed pulled up something on his tablet and turned it toward her. It was a news article from the New York Post. Socialite's charity event meltdown caught on camera. Teresa's stomach dropped. Someone posted a short video clip online the night of the gala, Reed explained. It's been taken down, but not before it got picked up by a few gossip blogs. You're identifiable in it, and Diana Lucchese is extremely identifiable. The story died quickly, barely a blip, but it happened. Does this compromise the operation? Not yet, but it puts eyes on you that we don't want. Reed leaned forward. Lucchese's people play dirty, Teresa. If they start looking into you, really looking, that cover identity we built won't hold up under serious scrutiny. It's good, but it's not ironclad. So what do you want me to do? Stay cautious. Continue your shifts, but be aware that you may be under observation. Don't deviate from your cover story. Don't make contact with anyone from the task force, unless it's through secure channels. And for God's sake, stay away from Diana Lucchese if you can help it. Teresa nodded, but something in Reed's tone made her pause. You think Romano will investigate me? I think Romano Lucchese didn't get where he is by ignoring details. Reed closed his tablet. And according to our intel, he's paranoid even by mob boss standards. If something about you feels off to him, he'll dig until he finds out why. Then my cover needs to hold. Your cover needs to be flawless. Reed stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Watch your back, Smith. These people don't give warnings. That same afternoon, at a sun-drenched bistro in Soho, Diana Lucchese held court with her usual circle of friends, wives of hedge fund managers, daughters of old money, women whose lives revolved around Pilates classes and charity galas. I'm telling you, she was completely incompetent, Diana said, gesturing with her mimosa glass. Nearly spilled champagne all over my Valentino. Can you imagine? And when I corrected her behavior, she had the audacity to just stand there staring at me. What did you do? Asked Clarissa Vanderberg, leaning in with the hungry interest of someone who lived for drama. What any reasonable person would do, I put her in her place. Diana's smile was sharp, satisfied. Someone had to teach that girl a lesson about respect. What Diana didn't notice was the woman at the next table. Phone angled discreetly, recording every word. By the time Diana finished her second mimosa, the video was already uploaded, captioned, entitled Socialite Brags About Slapping Black Waitress at Charity Event. Within 3 hours, it had 10,000 views. By evening, Romano's phone was ringing off the hook. We need to address this, said Tony Marchetti, Romano's public relations advisor, his voice tight with barely contained panic. Diana's video is trending on Twitter. People are calling for boycotts of your businesses. This is a PR nightmare. Romano stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking out over the city lights. Behind him, 3 of his advisors argued strategy, issue a statement, make a donation, distance himself from Diana's behavior. He heard none of it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment in the ballroom for the 100th time. The way Teresa Smith had absorbed the blow. The steadiness in her voice when she apologized for something that wasn't her fault. The look in her eyes, calculating, controlled, completely at odds with the helpless waitress she was supposed to be. Romano? Tony's voice cut through his thoughts. What do you want me to do about the video? Handle it however you think best, Romano said absently. Donate to some charity in the girl's name. Issue an apology on Diana's behalf. Whatever stops the noise. What he didn't say, what he kept to himself, was that he didn't care about the PR fallout. He cared about who Teresa Smith really was. And he was going to find out. The invitation came through Elite Event Staffing, 3 days after the video went viral. Mr. Romano Lucchese requests a private meeting with Miss Teresa Smith at the Venetian Grand Hotel Rooftop Bar, Thursday at 8 p.m. He wishes to offer a personal apology for the incident at the charity gala. Teresa stared at the email on her phone, her coffee growing cold in her hand. She was sitting in a corner booth at a diner near her apartment, supposedly reviewing client portfolios for her cover job. In reality, she'd been studying surveillance photos of Lucchese's known associates, committing faces to memory. Now one of those faces wanted to meet her alone. She forwarded the email to Reed with a single word. Thoughts? His response came within minutes. Could be genuine, could be a test, could be worse. Wear the wire. Keep your story straight. We'll have agents in the hotel. How close? Close enough to respond. Not close enough to save you if things go sideways. Teresa set down her phone and closed her eyes. She'd known this job would be dangerous when she signed up. Financial crimes didn't usually involve gun violence, but Romano Lucchese wasn't a typical white-collar criminal. He was a man who'd allegedly ordered executions, disappeared witnesses, built an empire on fear. And now he wanted to have drinks with her. She opened her eyes and typed back, I'll be there. The Venetian Grand's rooftop bar was the kind of place where Manhattan came to remind itself of its own magnificence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline, and subtle lighting made everyone look like they belonged in a fashion magazine. The Thursday evening crowd was thin, mostly couples murmuring over cocktails, a few business professionals entertaining clients. Teresa arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, wearing a simple navy dress that struck the balance between respectful and confident. The wire was hidden beneath her collar, a tiny microphone disguised as a decorative pin. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Romano Lucchese sat at a corner table, positioned so he could see the entire room, the instinct of a man who never sat with his back to a door. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw her approach, he stood an old-world gesture that seemed incongruous from a man rumored to have blood on his hands. "Miss Smith, thank you for coming." His voice was quieter than she expected, lacking the theatrical menace of movie mobsters. This was worse, somehow the calm tone of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be dangerous. "Mr. Lucchese." She remained standing until he gestured to the chair across from him. A waitress appeared immediately, young, nervous, clearly aware of who she was serving. Romano ordered a Macallan, neat. Teresa requested sparkling water with lime, not trusting herself to drink anything stronger. When they were alone again, Romano studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "I want to apologize," he said finally, "for my wife's behavior at the gala. It was unacceptable. Your wife already made her feelings clear, Mr. Lucchese. I'm not sure what you expect me to say." "I expect nothing. I'm offering you compensation for the humiliation you suffered." He slid an envelope across the table. $50,000. Consider it a settlement for emotional distress. Teresa looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Is this the part where I sign an NDA and promise to disappear quietly?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No NDA. Just an acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. Then you don't need to pay me. Most people would take the money." "I'm not most people." The drinks arrived, providing a momentary interruption. Romano took a slow sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Teresa could feel the weight of his scrutiny, the way he seemed to be measuring every micro-expression, every word she didn't say. "Who are you really, Miss Smith?" There it was, the question she'd been expecting since she walked in. "I'm a waitress trying to pay my bills and a part-time financial analyst trying to build a career. That's all." Her voice remained steady, calm. She'd practiced this story 100 times. A financial analyst. Romano's tone suggested he was tasting the words, testing them for truth. "From NYU. Top of your class. Working catering jobs on the side. Student loans don't pay themselves. Neither do mother's medical bills, I understand." He leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Patricia Smith. Nurse at Mount Sinai. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Currently in remission. Expensive medications. Is that why you need the extra work?" Teresa's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. He'd investigated her. Of course he had. "My mother's health is not your concern, Mr. Lucchese. Everything that happens in my city is my concern." His voice remained quiet, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath, especially when someone handles a very public insult with the kind of composure that suggests training, professional training. "Or I just have self-control." "Self-control," he nodded slowly. "Is that what you call it? Most people who get slapped in front of 300 witnesses cry, Miss Smith. They break down. They make a scene. You did none of those things. Would crying have changed anything? No. But it would have been human." He set down his glass. "You stood there like someone who'd been taught how to absorb pain without showing it. Like someone who knows that emotional reactions can be tactical mistakes." Teresa's mind raced. He was circling something, probing for weakness in her cover story. She needed to give him something, not the truth, but enough truth to satisfy his curiosity without confirming his suspicions. "I grew up in the South Bronx, Mr. Lucchese. I learned early that showing fear or pain just makes people hurt you more. So yes, I have self-control. I've had to." She leaned forward slightly. "But that doesn't make me whatever you think I am. It just makes me someone who survived a hard childhood and doesn't want pity from people who could never understand it." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "You're right. I apologize for the intrusion into your personal life." But his eyes told a different story. He didn't believe her, not entirely, yet he also seemed impressed. "The money," she said, nodding toward the envelope. "I don't want it. You can't buy back dignity, Mr. Lucchesi. It doesn't work that way." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He'd probably never heard those words from anyone in his life. In his world, everything had a price. Everyone could be bought. "That's a dangerous philosophy," he said softly. "Maybe. But it's mine." She stood, smoothing her dress. "If there's nothing else, I should go. I have an early shift tomorrow." Romano remained seated, watching her with that same unreadable intensity. "Miss Smith?" She paused. "Be careful. New York can be dangerous for idealists." It wasn't quite a threat. But it wasn't reassurance either. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for the apology." She turned and walked toward the elevator, feeling his eyes on her back with every step. When she was gone, Vince emerged from his position near the bar, sliding into the chair Teresa had vacated. "You want her gone?" he asked quietly, his hand resting casually near the inside of his jacket. Romano picked up the envelope of cash, turning it over in his hands. "No," he said finally. "I want her watched. Every move, every phone call, everyone she meets. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and where she goes when she thinks no one's paying attention. You think she's a cop? I think she's the first person in 10 years who's told me no, and meant it." Romano's voice was thoughtful, almost distant. "And I think that makes her either very brave or very foolish. Either way, I want to know which." He looked out at the glittering city skyline, at the empire he'd built through fear and force. Somewhere out there, Teresa Smith was walking home, believing she'd maintained her cover. But Romano Lucchesi was a patient man, and patient men always got their answers. Romano's office at Lucchesi Enterprises occupied the entire top floor of a glass tower in Midtown, with views that stretched from the Hudson to the East River. It was designed to impress Italian marble floors, original artwork that cost more than most houses, furniture that whispered old money and new power. But on this particular Monday morning, with his accountant standing nervously across the desk, the view offered no comfort. "Say that again," Romano said quietly, his voice dangerously calm. Michael Lorenzo, who'd been managing Lucchesi's books for 7 years, adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. 3.2 million. Gone. The transfers were made through the charity foundation account's small amounts over 6 months, routed through shell companies in the Caymans, then vanished. "And you're just noticing this now?" The accounts were set up to avoid scrutiny. Whoever did this knew exactly how to hide the transactions in legitimate donation traffic. Lorenzo pulled out a spreadsheet, pointing to highlighted cells. "Look at the authorization codes. These were approved by someone with executive access." Romano studied the numbers, his jaw tightening. Executive access meant family, meant trust, meant someone close enough to destroy him from within. "There's more," Lorenzo continued, his voice dropping. "Federal subpoenas came through this morning. They're requesting financial records for the past 3 years, all business entities, all charitable organizations. The U.S. Attorney's Office is building something. How long do we have? 30 days to comply, maybe less if they push." Romano dismissed him with a wave, waiting until the door closed before allowing his facade to crack. He pressed his palms against the cool marble of his desk, breathing slowly through his nose. His empire, built over 15 years through careful strategy and calculated risks, was fracturing. The feds were circling, money was disappearing, and somewhere in the machinery he'd constructed, someone was betraying him. He thought about his father's words, spoken years ago in a Brooklyn social club that smelled like cigars and espresso. "Power without loyalty is just a house built on sand, Romano. The first strong wave, and everything falls." His father had been right. Romano opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder, the expanded background check on Teresa Smith. He'd read it a dozen times, searching for the inconsistency that would explain why she fascinated him. Why her words "you can't buy back dignity" had lodged in his mind like a splinter. Behind him, the door opened without knocking. Only one person had that privilege. "We need to talk." Diana stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her designer dress wrinkled from a night she clearly hadn't spent at home. "About? About why you're obsessed with some waitress who should have been forgotten weeks ago." She stalked into the office, heels clicking against marble. "You had a private meeting with her, Romano. At the Venetian Grand. Don't think I don't know. I apologized for your behavior. That's all." "That's not all." Diana's voice rose, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "You've had Vince following her. You've been asking questions. And now I hear from Carla that you pulled strings to have her work schedule changed so she's at more of our events?" Romano said nothing, which only confirmed her suspicions. "What is she to you?" Diana demanded. "Is she your mistress? Some project? Or are you just trying to humiliate me by showing interest in the help?" "Go home, Diana. You're drunk. I'm clear-headed enough to see what's happening." She leaned across his desk, her breath sharp with wine and desperation. "That girl is nobody, Romano. A waitress from the Bronx who got lucky with a scholarship. Yet you're treating her like she's human?" Romano's voice was soft, lethal. "Like she deserves basic respect?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Diana straightened, her eyes narrowing. "You're changing. Ever since that night you've been different, distant, like you're judging me." "Maybe I am." She flinched as if he'd struck her. Then her expression hardened into something ugly rage mixed with wounded pride. "Fine. If you won't tell me who she really is, I'll find out myself." "Diana." But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the artwork on the walls. Diana Lucchese had never been the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully. As a child, she'd learned that beauty and money could get her almost anything. As an adult married to one of New York's most powerful men, she'd learned that power could get her the rest. So, when her husband dismissed her concerns about some insignificant waitress, she did what she always did when Romano wouldn't give her answers. She found them herself. The Venetian Grand's HR manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Russo, owed Diana several favors: a recommendation letter for her daughter, an introduction to the right people at the right charity, the currency of upper-class women's small kindnesses traded for future leverage. Diana called in those favors on Tuesday afternoon, meeting Patricia in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel. "I need employee records," Diana said without preamble. "Teresa Smith, the waitress from the gala." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Lucchese, I could lose my job, and I could make one phone call that ensures you never work in hospitality management again." Diana's smile was pleasant, her tone steel. "Or I could make another call that gets your daughter into the junior league. Your choice." 10 minutes later, Diana had photocopies of Teresa's employment file spread across her kitchen island. She studied them with the focus of a prosecutor examining evidence, looking for the thing that would prove her instincts right, that this girl was more than she appeared, that Romano's interest was justified, that there was a threat that needed to be eliminated. The address listed was in Washington Heights, but when Diana cross-referenced it with property records, a skill she'd learned from listening to Romano's business calls for years, the apartment was listed under a different name: Margaret Foster, age 67. The emergency contact was a P.O. box, not a phone number. The start date on her employment showed she'd been working elite events for 8 months, but her previous employment history had a 6-month gap with no explanation. Her social security number checked out, but her references were generic: a professor who'd retired, a community center that had closed. Diana sat back, her mind racing. None of it was overtly suspicious, but all of it felt wrong, like a picture that had been painted carefully but lacked depth. "Who are you really?" Diana whispered to the photocopied image of Teresa's professional headshot. The girl in the photo stared back, composed and unreachable. Diana picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed: a private investigator who'd done work for several of her friends, the kind of man who specialized in digging up dirt on mistresses and prenuptial violations. If Teresa Smith had secrets, Diana would find them. And when she did, she'd make sure Romano understood exactly who he'd been protecting. That evening, Romano sat alone in the conference room where he'd held countless meetings, negotiations, threats, the delicate dance of maintaining an empire. Around the table sat 5 empty chairs. 5 men who owed him loyalty. 5 possible sources of betrayal. On the table in front of him, financial reports, federal subpoenas, surveillance photos of his own people that Vince had compiled, and his wedding ring. He'd taken it off without thinking during a meeting that morning, setting it beside his espresso while he reviewed contracts. When the meeting ended, he'd forgotten to put it back on. Now, looking at the platinum band catching the light, he realized it had been hours and he hadn't missed it. Romano picked up the ring, turning it over in his fingers. Inside, an inscription: Eternal Loyalty. He thought about Diana's face when she'd slapped Teresa, the cruel satisfaction, the entitled rage. He thought about his wife's inability to see that girl as human, to recognize dignity in someone she considered beneath her. And he thought about Teresa's eyes meeting his across the ballroom, steady, unbroken, silently challenging him to be more than the monster his reputation suggested. His phone buzzed. A text from Vince. Smith just met someone at Federal Plaza. Male, 40s, government plates on his car. Want me to follow? Romano stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back, yes, get me everything. He set the wedding ring down beside his phone and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd claimed as his kingdom. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting. And Romano Lucchese was done pretending he didn't need to find it. The headline appeared on New York Insider at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, accompanied by a photograph that would change everything. Mafia boss's secret affair? Lucchese caught paying off mystery waitress? The photo was damning in its simplicity. Romano Lucchese, unmistakably him, sitting across from Teresa Smith at the Venetian Grand rooftop bar. The image had been cropped and enhanced to focus on the moment he'd slid the envelope across the table, making it look intimate, clandestine. His expression appeared tender in the frozen frame. Hers looked complicit. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo, dressed as journalism. Sources close to the Lucchese family report that Romano Lucchese, alleged head of one of New York's most powerful crime families, has been conducting a months-long affair with Teresa Smith, 24, a waitress he met at a charity gala. The same event where his wife, Diana Lucchese, was caught on video slapping Smith in what insiders now suggest was a jealous confrontation. Witnesses report multiple private meetings between Lucchese and Smith, including a recent rendezvous where he was photographed providing her with what appears to be cash payment, possibly hush money to keep the affair quiet. By 7:15 a.m., the story had been picked up by 3 gossip blogs. By 8 a.m., it was trending on Twitter. By 9 a.m., legitimate news outlets were running developing story segments, careful to add disclaimers while breathlessly repeating the allegations. Teresa's phone started ringing at 7:23 a.m. and didn't stop. She was in her apartment, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, staring at her laptop screen in disbelief. The photo, the headline, her face, suddenly attached to one of the most dangerous men in New York. Her secure phone, the one connected directly to the task force, buzzed with an incoming call. Reed's name appeared on the screen. Tell me you're seeing this. His voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. I'm looking at it right now. Teresa's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. It's a lie, all of it. That envelope was compensation for the slap. I refused it. There's no affair. I know that, but perception is reality in situations like this, and right now, the perception is that you've been compromised. Reed's exhale crackled through the line. We're pulling you out. Effective immediately. What? No. Marcus, I'm close. The recordings I have are inadmissible if your cover is blown, and a defense attorney can argue you obtained them under false pretenses while conducting an inappropriate relationship with the target. Reed's tone left no room for argument. Pack a bag. You're going to a safe house until we can assess the damage. This is exactly what someone wants. Don't you see? Someone planted this story to get me pulled out. Then they succeeded. A pause. I'm sorry, Teresa, but this operation is compromised. We'll regroup and find another way in. The line went dead. Teresa sat in the silence of her apartment, staring at her own face on the screen, young, black, positioned as both victim and seductress, her dignity stripped away for the second time by people who saw her as a pawn, in games she barely understood. But unlike the slap, this time she knew exactly who was responsible. And this time she wasn't going to stay silent. Romano found out about the article at 8:30 a.m. when his publicist called, voice pitched with panic. Have you seen New York Insider? Romano, this is catastrophic. The networks are calling. The Times wants a statement. We need to get ahead of this before. Romano hung up and pulled up the article on his phone. He read it once, then again, slower, analyzing not just what it said but what it implied. Someone had taken a private apology, a moment of attempted decency, and weaponized it. Someone had access to the Venetian Grand's security footage or had hired a photographer to surveil the rooftop bar. Someone wanted Teresa Smith destroyed. And there was only one person with motive, means, and the vindictive cruelty to execute this kind of attack. He found Diana in the penthouse living room, drinking champagne at 9 in the morning, watching a morning show that was breathlessly discussing the scandal. She didn't look up when he entered. Enjoying yourself? Romano's voice was ice. Should I not be? Diana took a delicate sip, eyes still on the screen. Your little waitress is famous now. Isn't that what these people want? They're 15 minutes? You did this. I have no idea what you're talking about. But her smile gave her away small, satisfied, cruel. Romano crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed the remote, shutting off the television. The sudden silence was deafening. You paid someone to write that story. You had us followed. You manufactured a scandal to destroy an innocent woman. His voice was low, deadly calm. Why? Innocent? Diana laughed, setting down her glass. She's not innocent, Romano. I had her investigated, real investigation, not whatever surface-level nonsense Vince gave you. Her address doesn't match her records. Her employment history has gaps. Her references are ghosts. That girl is lying about who she is. So, your solution was to fabricate an affair? To humiliate her publicly? To humiliate me? I did what you wouldn't. I protected this family. Diana stood, her composure cracking. You're so obsessed with her that you can't see what's right in front of you. She's dangerous, Romano. She's either a con artist or something worse, and you're too blinded by whatever middle-aged crisis you're having to realize it. I had one meeting with her. One, to apologize for your behavior. And you've had her followed ever since. You've rearranged her work schedule. You ask about her constantly. Diana's voice rose to a shout. Don't stand there and act like I'm paranoid when everyone in our circle can see you're fixated on some waitress half your age. Because she's the first person I've met in years who wasn't afraid of me. Romano's control shattered, his voice echoing off the marble floors. Because when you slapped her, she didn't grovel or beg or cry. She stood there with more dignity in her silence than you've shown in our entire marriage. The words hung between them like broken glass. Diana's face went white, then red. How dare you? You humiliated an innocent woman. Again. Romano's voice dropped back to that dangerous quiet. And this time, you used my name, my reputation, to do it. You made me complicit in your cruelty. She's not innocent. Can't you see that? Everything about her is wrong, Romano. Her records, her background, it's all carefully constructed. She's either a spy or she's working an angle, and when the truth comes out, you'll realize I saved you from what? From treating someone with basic human decency? From questioning whether an empire built on fear is worth protecting? He turned away, running his hands through his hair. I'm calling my lawyer. Diana froze. What? You heard me. I'm done, Diana. This marriage, this charade, it's over. You can't be serious. Over some waitress you barely know? Over the fact that I barely recognize myself anymore. Romano looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. You had an innocent woman's reputation destroyed because you were jealous of a single conversation. What does that say about who we've become? We? Diana's laugh was bitter. Don't pretend this is about morality, Romano. You've done far worse than plant a story in a tabloid. You've had people killed. You've ruined lives. But suddenly you're drawing the line at a little PR? Yes, he said simply. I am. Then you're a hypocrite and a fool. Diana grabbed her purse, her hands shaking with rage. But don't come crying to me when that girl turns out to be exactly what I think she is. And when your empire collapses because you were too distracted by some fantasy of redemption to see the knife coming for your back. She stormed toward the door, then stopped, turning back with one final weapon. She met with someone at Federal Plaza 2 days ago, Romano. Did you know that? A man in his 40s, government plates on his car. Vince saw it. Diana's smile was poisonous. So tell me again how innocent she is. The door slammed behind her, leaving Romano alone in the vast, empty penthouse. He stood there for a long moment, Diana's final words echoing in his mind. Federal Plaza, government plates. He pulled out his phone and called Vince. Tell me everything about the man Smith met with. Still working on ID, boss. But the meet lasted 47 minutes. She went in with a laptop bag, came out without it. Romano closed his eyes. Find out who he is, quietly. And Vince? Increase surveillance on my wife. I want to know everyone she's spoken to in the past 2 weeks. You think she's behind the missing money? I think I don't know who to trust anymore. He ended the call and walked to the window, looking out at the city that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Somewhere out there, Teresa Smith was dealing with a scandal his wife had created. And somehow, impossibly, Romano felt responsible for protecting her from it, even if it meant confronting truths he wasn't ready to face. The call came at 2 a.m, the hour when bad news couldn't wait and good news didn't exist. Romano was awake, as he often was these days, sitting in his home office with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched and financial records that made less sense the longer he stared at them. When his phone lit up with Vince's name, he answered before the second ring. Tell me you have something. I've got everything. Vince's voice was tight, the tone of a man who'd uncovered something he wished he hadn't. You need to see this in person, now. 20 minutes later, Vince sat across from Romano in the penthouse office, spreading documents across the desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence at trial. Marco Cellini, Vince said, tapping a surveillance photo of Diana's younger brother, a thin man with expensive taste and nervous eyes. Diana's baby brother, the one she got you to bring into the organization 3 years ago. I know who he is. Romano's jaw tightened. What about him? He's the leak, has been for at least 8 months. Vince pulled out bank statements highlighted in yellow. The missing $3.2 million? It didn't disappear. It was systematically transferred through the charity foundation accounts, the ones Diana oversees, and funneled to the Calabrese syndicate through a network of shell companies Marco set up. Romano's hand clenched around his glass. The Calabrese family had been trying to move into his territory for years, testing boundaries, probing for weakness. And all that time, the weakness had been sitting at his own family dinners. There's more, Vince continued, pulling out another folder. Marco's been feeding them intel shipment schedules, property acquisitions, the names of our people in the police department, everything they'd need to dismantle your operation piece by piece. Does Diana know? Hard to say for certain, but... Vince hesitated. The accounts he used were ones she had direct access to. Either she's the most negligent financial overseer in history, or she knew and looked the other way because it's family. Romano stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind him, his empire, his father's legacy, 15 years of careful construction, all of it compromised by blood ties and misplaced loyalty. How did you find this? Vince's expression turned strange, almost reluctant. That's the interesting part. I didn't find it first. The federal task force did. And they have evidence we don't, recordings from the charity gala. Conversations between Marco and Calabrese associates, discussions about the transfers, all captured on audio. Romano turned slowly. What recordings? The ones Teresa Smith made while she was serving drinks. Vince met his boss's eyes. She's not a waitress, Romano. She's a federal analyst, has been for 2 years. The whole time she's been working events, she's been gathering evidence for a RICO case against you. The words should have sparked rage. Instead, Romano felt something closer to vindication, the confirmation that his instincts had been right. She wasn't ordinary. She'd never been ordinary. Where is she now? Safe house in Queens. She's been pulled from the operation after Diana's smear campaign, but... Vince paused. My contact says she's still got the recordings. All of them. And boss? They include conversations you had that night. Things that could put you away for 20 years. Romano was silent for a long moment, thinking about the girl who'd stood in his ballroom with a red mark on her face and steel in her spine. The girl who'd refused his money and told him dignity couldn't be bought. Set up a meeting, he said quietly. Just me and her. Somewhere private. That's a terrible idea. Most of my best decisions are. Romano turned back to his desk, already planning his next move. And Vince? Find Marco. Quietly. I want him somewhere he can't run when I'm ready to deal with him. The meeting took place in a warehouse in Red Hook that Romano owned under 3 layers of shell companies, neutral ground, or as neutral as any place could be when one party held all the power. Teresa arrived with 2 federal agents who waited by the entrance, their presence a reminder that she was protected, untouchable. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, looking more like a graduate student than the sophisticated analyst who'd spent months infiltrating his world. Romano sat at a metal table in the center of the empty space, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. When she approached, he gestured to the chair across from him. Miss Smith. Or should I call you Special Analyst Smith? Teresa is fine. She sat, placing a small recording device on the table between them. I assume you know why I'm here. To destroy me with evidence you gathered while pretending to be someone you're not? To offer you a choice. Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. Because destroying you was never the goal. Stopping the corruption was. Romano leaned back, studying her. Explain the difference. Instead of answering, she pressed play on the recorder. The audio quality was remarkably clear, voices layered over the ambient noise of the gala, conversations captured while she moved between tables with perfect, invisible efficiency. First, Marco's voice, nervous and excited, speaking to someone identified only as Sal. The next transfer goes through on the 15th. 200K, same route as before. Diana thinks it's for the children's hospital expansion. Then, Diana herself laughing with friends. Romano's so paranoid about federal investigations, but he never thinks to look at the charity accounts. Men never do. And finally, conversations from Romano's own table, discussions about property acquisitions, mentions of cleaning money through legitimate businesses, references to people who'd been handled. When the recording ended, silence filled the warehouse like a held breath. "You were recording me too?" Romano's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Only the truth." Teresa's response was immediate, unflinching. "Everything on those recordings is real, words actually spoken, deals actually made. I didn't fabricate anything. I just listened. You used me. I investigated you. There's a difference." She leaned forward. "But if I'd wanted to destroy you, Mr. Lucchese, you'd already be in custody. The U.S. attorney has been pushing to make arrests for weeks. I'm the one who convinced them to wait." "Why?" "Because the recordings also prove that Diana and Marco have been embezzling from your organization and feeding intelligence to your enemies. Because the evidence shows a pattern of betrayal that you weren't part of, that you were a victim of." Teresa's voice softened slightly. "And because when your wife slapped me, you looked at her the way someone looks at a stranger, like you were seeing who she really was for the first time." Romano said nothing, but something in his expression shifted. "I can't make the federal case disappear," Teresa continued, "but I can help shape it. Focus it on the real criminals, the Calabrese family, Marco, the network of corruption that's been using your legitimate businesses as cover. In exchange, you cooperate. You purge the criminal elements from your empire, transition to legitimate operations, and testify against the people who've been betraying you. You want me to become an informant. I want you to become legitimate." She held his gaze. "You built something powerful, Mr. Lucchese, but it's built on a foundation that's rotting from within. Either you tear it down and rebuild it clean, or the federal government tears it down for you and you spend the rest of your life in prison. And what do you get out of this? Witness protection for my mother and me, a successful case against organized crime, and the knowledge that I didn't just destroy a man who might actually be capable of change." Her voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. "Diana was right about one thing. You have been different since the gala. I've watched you, Mr. Lucchese. The way you question your own people now, the distance you've put between yourself and the violence. You're already changing. I'm offering you a chance to finish what you started." Romano stood and walked a slow circle around the table, his mind working through angles, consequences, survival calculations he'd been making his entire adult life. Finally, he stopped behind his chair, hands gripping the metal back. "My mother always told me that God gives everyone one chance at redemption," he said quietly. "Most people are too proud or too stupid to take it." He looked at Teresa, really looked at her, and saw not an enemy, but a mirror reflecting everything he'd tried not to see about himself. "I want Marco and the Calabrese associates prosecuted to the fullest extent. I want Diana's involvement investigated, and I want my legitimate businesses protected. Done. And one more thing." His voice hardened. "That smear campaign Diana orchestrated against you, I want it publicly corrected. Your name cleared. She doesn't get to destroy your reputation and walk away clean." Teresa blinked, surprised. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Romano's tone left no room for argument. "You've lost enough because of my family. I won't let you lose your dignity too." For the first time since entering the warehouse, Teresa smiled, small, genuine, tired. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Lucchese." She extended her hand across the table. Romano took it, sealing a partnership neither of them had imagined possible 3 months ago, when she was just a waitress and he was just a monster, and the truth hadn't yet set either of them free. The leak happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Marco Cellini was scheduled to surrender to federal authorities as part of his plea deal. Desperate men do desperate things, and Marco, staring down 15 years in federal prison even with cooperation, decided that if he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. At 6:32 a.m., every major news outlet in New York received an anonymous email containing audio files, bank records, and a meticulously detailed breakdown of the Lucchese family's criminal enterprise, not from federal prosecutors building a case, but from a man burning down his own house to stay warm. By 7 a.m., the first story broke. By 8 a.m., it was everywhere. CNN breaking news. Leaked audio exposes Mafia money laundering scheme, wife and brother-in-law implicated. New York Times. The fall of a crime family. Inside the Lucchese organization's collapse. New York Post. Mob wife's double betrayal, racist slap, just the beginning. The recordings played on loop across every news channel. Marco's nervous voice discussing transfers. Diana's callous laughter as she dismissed her husband's paranoia, the charity gala conversations that proved what everyone had suspected, but no one could prove. Romano Lucchese ran a criminal empire. But the story that captured the public's imagination wasn't the money laundering or the mob connections. It was Diana. The audio of her bragging at brunch about slapping that girl played alongside the original viral video, creating a damning portrait of privilege and cruelty. Her voice dripping with contempt as she discussed, "People like you and civilized society," became a symbol of everything people hated about the wealthy elite. Social media exploded with a fury that transcended typical news cycles. Number Diana Lucchese trended worldwide. Think pieces appeared within hours. White privilege and casual racism in high society. When charity becomes a stage for cruelty. The woman who thought she was untouchable. By noon, protesters had gathered outside the Lucchese penthouse, holding signs that read, "Dignity can't be bought," and "Resist rich woman exposed." Diana's carefully curated world disintegrated in real time. The calls started before Diana had finished her morning coffee. First, Clarissa Vanderberg, her voice tight with barely concealed glee at having drama to share. "Diana, darling, I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel lunch today. Family emergency. You understand." Then Margaret Ashford from the Metropolitan Opera Board. "Given the current situation, we think it's best if you step down from your committee position. Just temporarily, of course, until things settle down. Then the Junior League. Then the Museum of Modern Art. Then every charity board, social club, and elite organization that had welcomed her money and tolerated her presence. One by one, her carefully constructed social network collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. By 2 in the afternoon, Diana sat alone in the penthouse living room, watching her own face on television, while news anchors dissected her character with the clinical precision of surgeons examining a malignant tumor. The audio reveals a pattern of racist behavior and financial corruption. Prosecutors are investigating whether Diana Lucchese knowingly facilitated money laundering through charitable organizations. Her husband, Romano Lucchese, has reportedly filed for divorce and is cooperating with federal authorities. The divorce papers had been served that morning by a lawyer Diana had never met, accompanied by 2 federal agents who informed her she was under investigation for conspiracy to commit money laundering and wire fraud. Her brother, Marco, was nowhere to be found, already in federal custody, she'd learn later, having traded her freedom for a reduced sentence. The penthouse, her penthouse, with its $1 million views and imported marble, was no longer hers. Romano had seized control of all assets through legal maneuvers she didn't understand and couldn't fight. Her bank accounts were frozen, her credit cards declined, the designer clothes in her closet, and the jewelry in her safe, all of it purchased with money that prosecutors now claimed was the proceeds of criminal enterprise. Everything she'd taken for granted had vanished in a single morning. The formal charges came 3 days later. Diana Lucchese was indicted on 14 counts: conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, structuring financial transactions to evade reporting requirements, and aiding and abetting criminal enterprise. Her attorney, the 4th one she'd tried to hire after the first 3 declined to represent her, explained the situation with brutal honesty. "The recordings are devastating. Your brother is cooperating and has provided testimony that you were aware of the scheme. The U.S. attorney is offering 7 years if you plead guilty. If you go to trial and lose, you're looking at 25. Romano did this," Diana whispered, her voice hollow. "He's punishing me." "No, Mrs. Lucchese. You did this. Romano is saving himself. There's a difference." The arraignment was a media circus. Cameras flashed as Diana was led into the courthouse. No longer draped in designer silk, but wearing a simple navy suit that someone from her legal team had purchased, because all her expensive clothes had been seized as evidence of ill-gotten gains. The woman who had once commanded attention through beauty and status now drew eyes for entirely different reasons. The cautionary tale, the fallen socialite, the racist wife who thought she was above consequences. Protesters lined the courthouse steps, some holding photos of Teresa Smith with messages like, "She stood with dignity," and "You tried to break her, you broke yourself." Diana kept her eyes down, her face hidden behind sunglasses, as her attorney negotiated her bail $500,000, which Romano refused to pay. A distant cousin eventually posted it, more out of family obligation than affection. That night, Diana returned not to her penthouse but to a modest hotel room paid for by her attorney's retainer. No chandeliers, no marble, no staff to bring her champagne or validate her importance. Just silence and a television showing her own face alongside the word disgraced on every channel. She'd wanted to put that waitress in her place. Instead, she'd discovered her own. In a federal safe house in Queens, Teresa Smith sat on a second-hand couch watching the news coverage with Agent Reed beside her. "You should feel vindicated," Reed said, watching Diana's perp walk play on repeat. "She tried to destroy you. Now she's facing justice." "Is that what this is?" Teresa's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Justice? What would you call it?" "Consequences." Teresa picked up the remote and muted the television. Diana's silent face frozen mid-stride on screen. "She's losing everything because she couldn't see people as human. Not because of me, because of who she chose to be." Reed nodded slowly. "The U.S. attorney wants you to testify at her trial. Your perspective as the victim of her assault would be powerful." "I'm not her victim." Teresa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the anonymous Queens neighborhood where she'd been hidden for her own protection. "I'm just the person who was there when she revealed who she really was. The cameras, the recordings, her own words, those are what destroyed her. I was just waitress serving drinks." "You were never just a waitress." Teresa smiled faintly. "No, but she thought I was, and that's what made all the difference." On the television, the silent footage shifted to Romano Lucchese, leaving a federal building, surrounded by attorneys. His face was drawn, older somehow, the weight of betrayal and transformation visible in the lines around his eyes. "What happens to him?" Teresa asked. "Depends on how well he cooperates. If he's serious about going legitimate, about dismantling the criminal elements of his organization, he might actually pull it off. House arrest, probation, forfeiture of assets, but no prison time." Reed stood, preparing to leave. "He's asking about you, by the way." "Asking what?" "If you're okay. If the safe house is comfortable. If there's anything you need." Reed's expression was unreadable. "For a mob boss, he seems genuinely concerned about your well-being." Teresa said nothing, but something in her chest tightened in emotion she couldn't quite name. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Queens, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere across the city, Diana Lucchese was learning what it meant to lose everything. Somewhere else, Romano Lucchese was learning what it meant to rebuild. And here, in this anonymous safe house, Teresa Smith was learning that justice didn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it just felt like the end of something that should have never begun, and the uncertain hope that something better might grow from the ashes. 6 months had passed since the world learned the truth about the Lucchese empire, 6 months of trials and testimony, plea deals and public reckonings, the slow dismantling of structures built on fear, and the even slower construction of something resembling redemption. The Venetian Grand Hotel ballroom looked exactly as it had that night, crystal chandeliers casting golden light across marble floors, imported flowers perfuming the air, the soft murmur of voices belonging to people who believed they mattered. But everything else had changed. Teresa Smith stood near the main staircase, exactly where Romano Lucchese had stood when he watched his wife slap her across the face. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of success without arrogance, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, a quiet confidence radiating from her that drew eyes without demanding them. The placard near the entrance read, "Pathways to Dignity, a financial literacy initiative for service workers, founded by Teresa Smith, financial consultant and advocate." The charity event she'd organized had drawn an unexpected crowd, not just wealthy donors looking for tax write-offs, but former waitstaff, hotel workers, service industry professionals whose labor made events like this possible, but who were rarely invited to attend them. Tonight, they sat at tables alongside executives and philanthropists, equals in a room that had once treated them as invisible. "You've done something remarkable here," said Patricia Smith, Teresa's mother, standing beside her daughter with tears in her eyes. The cancer was in remission now, the medical bills finally manageable thanks to the consulting firm Teresa had launched after leaving federal service. "I'm so proud of you, baby." "I didn't do it alone, Mama." Teresa squeezed her mother's hand, thinking of Agent Reed, who'd fought to get her the commendation that helped launch her career. Of Maria, her former co-worker, who now sat at a front table as the guest of honor. Of everyone who'd believed that dignity wasn't purchased, it was claimed. The music shifted, a string quartet playing something elegant and hopeful, and Teresa excused herself to check on the evening's schedule. She was reviewing notes with the event coordinator when she felt it, that particular awareness that comes from being watched by someone whose attention carries weight. She turned. Romano Lucchese stood near the entrance, alone. No bodyguards flanked him. No entourage announced his importance. He wore a simple black suit, his dark hair touched with more gray than she remembered, his face leaner, as if the past months had stripped away everything but essentials. Their eyes met across the ballroom, across the same space where their story had begun with violence and humiliation, and something unspoken passed between them. He approached slowly, and the room seemed to hold its breath. People recognized him. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but no one moved to stop him. "Miss Smith." His voice was quieter than she remembered, stripped of the casual authority that had once made men tremble. "I wasn't sure you'd want me here. You RSVP'd, donated $50,000 to the foundation." Teresa's tone was carefully neutral. "Why wouldn't you be welcome?" "Because the last time I was in this ballroom, I stood and watched my wife assault you and did nothing to stop it." Romano's jaw tightened. "Because my family tried to destroy you, and I was too concerned with my empire to recognize it until almost too late. And yet here you are." She gestured to the room, to the diverse crowd, to the banners explaining the foundation's mission, to the visible transformation of a space that had once symbolized exclusion. "What do you think?" He looked around slowly, taking it in, really seeing it the way he'd learned to see things over the past months. Not as a mob boss calculating angles and leverage, but as a man trying to remember what it meant to build something that helped rather than hurt. "I think you've done what I never could," he said finally. "Created something that empowers instead of exploits, that elevates instead of diminishes." He turned back to her. "You've changed more than my company, Teresa. You've changed me." It was the first time he'd used her first name. The intimacy of it, earned through shared trauma and reluctant partnership, hung between them. "Have I?" Teresa's voice was gentle, testing. "Or did you change yourself, and I just happened to be there when you decided to look in the mirror?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe both." The months since their deal had transformed Romano's world as completely as they'd transformed Teresa's. He'd testified against the Calabrese family, watched former associates go to prison, systematically dismantled the criminal infrastructure his father had built. Lucchese Enterprises now existed solely as a legitimate real estate development company, its board of directors packed with independent oversight, and its books open to quarterly federal audits. He'd lost half his wealth in asset forfeitures and legal fees, lost his marriage, his reputation, the fear-based respect that had defined him for decades. But he'd kept his freedom, and, he was beginning to understand, he'd found something more valuable, the possibility of becoming someone his father would have despised but his children might someday respect. "I heard you're teaching a financial literacy course at City College," Romano said, "training the next generation of analysts." "Someone has to." Teresa's smile was genuine now, warm. "The federal government could use more people who understand how money moves through criminal enterprises. And legitimate businesses could use more people who refuse to look the other way when something seems wrong. You're building an army of people with your kind of integrity. I'm building a community of people who understand that dignity and success aren't mutually exclusive." She paused, studying him. "What about you, Mr. Lucchese? What are you building?" "Something smaller, cleaner. A company my daughter might want to inherit someday instead of flee from." His voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. "I'm teaching her that real power isn't making people afraid of you. It's earning respect from people who have every reason to hate you but choose not to." "Is that what I've done? Chosen not to hate you?" Romano met her eyes, and the honesty there was startling. "I think you've chosen to believe people can change, even people like me, even after everything." Teresa was quiet for a moment, remembering the girl she'd been 6 months ago, frightened, humiliated, standing in this same ballroom with a burning cheek and a hidden recorder. Remembering how she'd chosen dignity over rage, strategy over surrender. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Lucchese," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of conviction earned through fire. "Even you. Especially you. I don't know if I deserve it. Deserving is irrelevant. It's what you do with the chance that matters." The music swelled the quartet, transitioning into something celebratory, and the event coordinator signaled that it was time for Teresa's opening remarks. "I should go," she said. "Thank you for coming, and for supporting the foundation." "Teresa," he stopped her with just her name. "That night, when Diana slapped you, I saw something in your eyes that I'd never seen before. Strength without cruelty. Dignity without arrogance. It haunted me, made me question everything I'd built. And now I understand that you weren't just a waitress who happened to cross her path. You were a mirror reflecting everything wrong with the world I'd created." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not breaking that mirror, for holding it steady until I finally looked." Teresa felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. The recognition that transformation was possible, that people could evolve beyond their worst moments if they chose to do the work. The slap that was meant to break me built me instead, she said softly. Maybe your empire falling was what built you. She turned toward the stage, where a microphone waited, and a room full of people powerful and powerless, wealthy and struggling. All of them human waited to hear her speak. Behind her, Romano Lucchese stood alone in the ballroom where his old life had ended, watching the woman who'd helped him understand that endings could also be beginnings. The chandeliers shimmered overhead, the same ones that had witnessed cruelty and humiliation. Now they illuminated something different. Grace, justice, and the quiet triumph of a woman who'd refused to let anyone's violence define her worth. Teresa Smith took the stage, and the ballroom, that cathedral of privilege and pretense, fell silent to listen to the girl they'd once dismissed. She smiled, remembering who she'd been and celebrating who she'd become, and she began to speak. What a journey! From a single slap to complete transformation, Teresa rose, Diana fell, and Romano discovered what it means to truly rebuild. But stories like this only reach people when you take action. So right now, smash that like button. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next thrilling story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and which character's journey affected you most. Share this video with someone who loves powerful stories about justice and redemption. Your support determines what stories we bring you next. Every like, comment, and share matters. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.